video, I'll show you how to sew a French seam on a sewing machine. A seam and seam finish that's perfect for transparent fabrics or when the inside of your sewing project may show. A French seam completely encloses the raw fabric edges inside the seam, so no raw edges are visible. This technique is commonly used on lightweight, delicate and sheer fabrics because it creates a clean finish on both the inside and outside of a sewing project. French seams are often found on blouses, dresses, lingerie and children's clothing, especially when the inside of the garment may be seen. They're also strong and durable, but they're generally not suitable for thick or bulky fabrics because the enclosed seam allowances can create excess bulk. Before we begin, make sure you have all the materials and tools you need ready to go. I've listed everything used in this video in the description below, along with helpful links. Unlike most seams, French seams begin with the wrong sides of the fabric facing together. Depending on your fabric, it's best practice to secure the seam before sewing. For example, I'm using a lightweight calico fabric, so I've pinned the layers together. I also have a video all about different ways to secure seams before sewing, which I've linked in the description below. Before we start sewing, make sure your machine is set up correctly. Every sewing machine is a little different, so always refer to your sewing machine manual for the best guidance. That means using the correct needle and thread for your fabric, attaching a standard zigzag presser foot, threading the machine properly, and doing a quick test stitch on scrap fabric first. For example, I'm using a lightweight calico fabric, a size 70 or 10 universal needle, polyester sew-all thread, and a standard zigzag presser foot. My machine is set to a centre-aligned straight stitch, a stitch length of 2.5, and a thread tension of 4. Pull the presser foot lever upwards to raise the presser foot. Place the fabric under the presser foot, aligning the raw edge with the edge of the presser foot. On most standard presser feet, this measures approximately 1/4 inch or 6 mm, which is the seam allowance we'll use for the first pass of a French seam. If you're unsure, use a ruler to check the distance on your own machine. I like to use a magnetic seam guide to make the guideline more visible and help keep the seam allowance consistent. However, only use magnetic seam guides on manual sewing machines, as the magnet can interfere with digital machines. For digital machines, use a strip of masking tape instead to create a more visible seam guide. Alternatively, you can use a 1/4 inch foot or a 1/4 inch guide foot, which are designed to help you sew consistent 1/4 inch or 6 mm seam allowances. Turn the handle towards you to lower the needle into the fabric about 3 mm from the edge. Smooth both threads towards the back of the machine. This helps prevent tangling and keeps the stitches neat when you begin sewing. Push the presser foot lever downwards to lower the presser foot and hold the fabric in place. Lightly hold the threads and gently press the foot pedal to sew a couple of stitches forward. Release the threads, then press and hold the reverse stitch button. Sew a few stitches backwards to secure the seam. For very fine or delicate fabrics, skip this step as backstitching may cause puckering. Release the reverse stitch button and continue sewing forwards. Guide the fabric along the seam guideline, allowing the feed dogs to move the fabric naturally. Try not to pull or push the fabric through the machine. And remember, never sew over pins. Remove them before they reach the presser foot. When you reach the end, backstitch a few stitches to secure the seam. Again, if you're sewing very delicate fabrics, skip the backstitching. Raise the needle if needed and raise the presser foot and remove the fabric from the machine. Cut the threads using the sewing machine thread cutter or a pair of embroidery scissors. Using a ruler and a fabric marking tool, mark a line on the seam allowance 3 mm or 1/8 inch away from the stitching line. Using sharp fabric scissors, trim both seam allowances along the marked line. Take care not to cut the stitching. This step reduces bulk and helps prevent frayed threads from showing inside the finished seam. Finger press the seam open. Then using an iron and an ironing board, or in this example a pressing mat, press the seam open to embed the stitching. Turn the seam over and press the seam again. This helps the seam lie flat and makes the next steps easier. Turn the seam over again, then fold the fabric along the stitching line so that the right sides of the fabric are now facing together. Finger press the seam flat so the stitching sits exactly on the folded edge. Press the fold flat. Pin the folded seam in place and tack if needed. This helps keep everything aligned while sewing the final row of stitching. Place the fabric onto the presser foot, this time aligning the raw edge with the 3/8 of an inch seam guideline on the throat plate. This is the most common French seam allowance used in garment sewing that will enclose the trim seam allowances. Lower the needle, position the threads, and lower the presser foot. Sew the second seam. Remember to backstitch within the seam allowances at the beginning and end of the seam for added strength, and remove pins before they reach the presser foot. Raise the needle if needed and raise the presser foot and remove the fabric from the machine. Cut the threads. Turn the seam over to the right side of the fabric and press the finished French seam to one side, usually towards the back of the garment. And that's how you sew a French seam. For more sewing Bexpertise, I've linked helpful videos in the description below. Please don't forget to subscribe, and as always, happy sewing!